August 7, 1951. 11:45 a.m. A cramped conference room in the Ministry of Supply, Farnborough, England. The air hangs heavy with cigarette smoke and the faint tang of machine oil from the model aircraft carrier on the table, a 3-foot replica of HMS Illustrious, its straight flight deck gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. Captain Dennis Campbell, his uniform crisp but his eyes shadowed by years of wartime skies, stares at the tiny deck as if it holds the ghosts of fallen pilots. His fingers drum on the wood, mind racing ahead of the meeting that's about to begin. Outside, the summer rain patters against the window like distant flak, but inside, the storm is brewing in his thoughts. What if everything they knew about carrier landings was wrong? You can almost hear the roar of jet engines slicing through the fog of memory. Campbell isn't just any officer. He's a battle-hardened naval aviator, a man who danced with death over the Atlantic and Pacific during the war. As commander of 803 Naval Air Squadron in the late 30s, he'd led Fairey Swordfish biplanes into the fray, their fabric wings shuddering against enemy fire. By 1940, he'd earned the Distinguished Service Cross for his daring raids on German shipping off Norway, where the cold sea claimed more lives than bullets. But now, in this post-war era, the threats have evolved. Jets like the de Havilland Sea Vampire and the Grumman F-9F Panther scream onto decks at 140 knots, twice the speed of propeller birds. Their heavier frames demand longer stopping distances, turning every landing into a high-stakes gamble. Picture it, a straight-deck carrier, like the venerable USS Enterprise or HMS Ark Royal during the war, slicing through choppy seas. Forward, aircraft huddle in the deck park, wings folded like wary predators. Aft, the landing area, a narrow strip rigged with arresting wires and crash barriers. The landing signal officer, or batsman, stands exposed on the platform, paddles flailing like semaphores in a gale. Lower! Power on! Cut! His commands are life or death. But miss a wire, and chaos erupts. The plane slams into the barrier, a web of steel cables meant to catch it like a fly in a spider's net. Sparks fly, metal screeches, and if the barrier fails, God help them, the rogue aircraft plows into the parked planes ahead, igniting a fireball that engulfs the deck in seconds. During World War II, these accidents were the silent killers. In the heat of the Pacific campaigns, carriers like USS Lexington lost dozens of aircraft not to Japanese Zeros, but to their own decks. Pilots, exhausted from sorties over Guadalcanal or Tarawa, approached too high or too fast. The barriers, introduced mid-war to protect the forward park, often turned mishaps into catastrophes. Wires snapped under strain, sending planes tumbling overboard or into the island superstructure. Deck crews scrambled, hoses at the ready, but the human cost mounted. Young ensigns fresh from Pensacola or Cranwell, their faces still boyish under flight helmets, vanished in plumes of smoke. Statistics whispered the horror. In the early jet trials post-war, accident rates spiked to 1 crash per 1,000 landings. 80% of those were barrier engagements or overruns, avoidable if only the deck could forgive a mistake. Campbell knows this intimately. As a test pilot in the 40s, he'd felt the deck heave beneath him, the arrestor hook scraping for purchase. Now, as Deputy Chief Naval Representative, he's tasked with taming the beast. The meeting today? A desperate pitch for a flexible deck, a rubber mat to cushion wheel-less landings for jets without undercarriages. It's radical, born from wartime experiments at Farnborough's Royal Aircraft Establishment. But as Campbell fiddles with the model, aligning tiny jet replicas, doubt creeps in. The mat would demand pinpoint accuracy, and what about the barriers? The catapults? The endless cycle of launch, land, reset? He sketches idly on a notepad, a quick line, then another. The deck tilts in his mind's eye. What if? He angles the landing path off-center, veering 10 degrees to port. The arresting wires shift with it. No more barreling into the forward park. A missed hook? The pilot throttles up, banks away over the sea, circles back unharmed. Launches continue uninterrupted from the bow. His heart quickens. It's crazy, defying a century of naval design since Eugene Ely's first carrier landing in 1911. But in that moment, staring at his crude drawing, Campbell sees salvation. The door opens. Colleagues file in. Louis Boddington, the brilliant aeronautical engineer from RAE, with his precise mind and wire-rimmed glasses, naval constructors scribbling notes, test pilots swapping war stories. Campbell straightens, slides the sketch forward. "Gentlemen," he says, voice steady but laced with urgency, "forget the mat for a second. What if we angled the deck itself?" Laughter ripples, polite, but skeptical. "Angle it? You'd skew the whole ship," one snorts. Boddington leans in, eyes narrowing on the drawing. The room quiets. Campbell's idea hangs in the air like a flare over a night sea. Is this madness, or the breakthrough that could save lives? As the debate ignites, no one yet knows that this crazy notion will slash carrier crashes by 80%, reshaping naval aviation forever. But first, they must confront the ghosts of the past, the deadly dances on straight decks that claimed so many during the war. Section 2. The spark ignites. The room falls silent as Campbell's sketch passes from hand to hand. Louis Boddington, the RAE's chief aerodynamicist, adjusts his glasses and traces the angled line with a finger. His face, usually impassive, betrays a flicker of excitement. "It's elegant," he murmurs. Radial separation. The landing path diverges from the axial centerline. A bolter, no hook engagement, simply powers up and veers clear over the port side. No barrier smash. No deck foul. Campbell nods, leaning forward. Exactly. And we keep the forward deck park intact. Catapults forward remain operational. Simultaneous launch and recovery. The cycle time halves. But more than that. He pauses, voice dropping. It removes the terror. No more praying the hook catches while hurtling toward steel cables and parked aircraft. The pilot knows. Miss, and he flies away safe. Lives saved. Aircraft saved. Carriers stay in the fight longer. Skepticism lingers in some eyes. A constructor points out the structural nightmare, extending the deck to port, reinforcing the overhang, realigning arresting wires, barriers, even the island superstructure slightly. Cost, time, risk. But Boddington counters quickly. We start small. Paint the angle on an existing deck. Touch-and-go trials. No metal cut yet. Prove the concept in the air before we commit steel. The meeting stretches into the afternoon. Voices rise and fall. Campbell sketches variations. 5 degrees, 8, 10. He recalls the wartime horror stories he'd heard from American friends. USS Franklin burning after a kamikaze hit ignited deck-parked planes. Enterprise's repeated barrier crashes in 42. The endless funerals for pilots who simply ran out of deck. Jets make it worse. Higher approach speeds. Heavier airframes. Less forgiveness. The straight deck's unforgiving geometry turns minor errors into disasters. 80% of jet-era mishaps, the stat scream, stem from barrier strikes or overruns into parked aircraft. By evening, consensus forms. Test it. HMS Triumph, a light fleet carrier fresh from refit, becomes the guinea pig. No major yard work, just white paint. In early 1952, a mock-angled deck outline appears on her axial flight deck, 5.5 degrees off-center, landing wires still aligned axially for now, but the visual cue clear. Pilots from the test squadron strap into Sea Vampires and Sea Hawks, early jets with twitchy handling at low speed. You can picture the first approach. A young lieutenant, heart hammering, lines up on the painted angle. The batsman waves him in. Deck pitching in the channel chop. He crosses the round down, hook down, power steady. Thump, The wheels hit. Hook snags a wire. Deceleration slams him forward. But if it misses? Full throttle. The jet surges, wings bite air, and he climbs away over open sea instead of smashing into the island or the bow pack. No fireball. No screams from the deck crew. Just clean air. Trials pile up. Day after day. Touch-and-go passes. Full arrested landings with the angle in mind. Pilots report instant confidence. It's like the deck forgives you, one says. No more staring at that bloody barrier wondering if today's the day it fails. Bolters, missed engagements, drop dramatically in severity. Aircraft that would have plowed forward now simply wave off safely. Deck cycles accelerate. Launch while recovering. The carrier's heartbeat steadies. Word spreads fast. U.S. Navy observers arrive, notebooks in hand. They watch from the island, see jets bolter without chaos, hear the lack of crash alarms. Back in Washington, the idea catches fire. By late 1952, USS Antietam heads to Brooklyn Navy Yard for the real thing. A permanent angled deck, 8 degrees, overhanging sponsons welded on, wires realigned. Sea trials off Cuba, January 1953. Over 270 landings, day, night, by green pilots and veterans. Results, stunning. Minimal incidents. Continuous ops during recoveries. The Americans, still smarting from Korean War deck accidents where straight deck carriers lost planes and men to barrier mishaps, see the future. But back in Britain, Campbell pushes harder. Triumph's painted trials convince the Admiralty, retrofit the fleet. HMS Centaur gets the first full structural angle in 1954. Then the crown jewel, HMS Ark Royal, still building, altered mid-construction to incorporate the full-angle design alongside new steam catapults. February 1955. She commissions with the world's first purpose-built angled deck. Campbell, now commanding her briefly, stands on the bridge during initial ops. Jets scream down the offset path. Hooks catch. Bolters peel away harmlessly. The deck hums with unbroken rhythm. The numbers tell the story quietly but powerfully. Pre-angled deck, jet landing accidents hovered at alarming rates, barrier strikes and deck fouls claiming the majority. Post-adoption, across Royal Navy and U.S. fleets, mishap rates plummet. Studies later quantify it, up to 80% reduction in major flight deck crashes tied to landing errors. Lives preserved. Squadrons kept at strength. Carriers projecting power without bleeding aircraft. Yet the invention's beauty lies in its simplicity. No exotic tech. Just a 10-degree shift. A line on paper that bent history. Campbell never sought the spotlight. He retired in 1960, decorated with the CB and the American Legion of Merit. But on every angled deck carrier still sailing today, from Nimitz-class behemoths to Queen Elizabeth, his quiet eureka moment echoes in every safe landing. The crazy method wasn't crazy at all. It was salvation. Flash back to the Pacific, 1944. USS Enterprise, CV-6, steams at 30 knots through the gray dawn off the Marianas. Dawn patrol returns. Hellcats and Avengers, engines coughing oil smoke, pilots bone-tired after hours hunting Japanese carriers. The deck is alive, yellow-jacketed directors waving planes into position, arresting wires tensioned, crash barrier up like a steel guillotine. One F-6F Hellcat approaches too hot, too low. The hook misses every wire. Throttle jammed forward in panic, but too late. The fighter slams into the barrier at 90 knots. Cables whip, snap. Shrapnel flies. The plane cartwheels, fuel tanks rupture, and fire blooms across the forward deck park where 20 more aircraft sit wingtip to wingtip, fully armed. Screams cut through the roar. Deck crew lunges with CO2 bottles, but the blaze leaps from plane to plane. Within minutes, 7 aircraft are lost, 3 men dead, 19 wounded. Enterprise limps out of the fight, her air group gutted, not by enemy fire, but by her own deck. This wasn't rare. In the brutal carrier battles of 42 to 45, straight-deck mishaps claimed hundreds of planes and pilots. USS Lexington in 42. Barrier failure sends a Dauntless into the island, starting fires that doom the ship. Hornet at Santa Cruz. Similar story. Even the Big E would suffer repeated deck fires from landing accidents. You feel the dread in every approach. The pilot, sweat stinging his eyes behind goggles, lines up on the pitching deck. The batsman's paddles flash. Too high, chop power. Too low, add throttle. One misjudgment, one gust of wind, one frayed wire, and the barrier becomes a death trap. If it holds, the plane stops inches from parked aircraft, but the jolt often shears wings or ignites fuel. If it fails, the runaway bird plows forward, turning the deck into an inferno. No go-around possible at low altitude, low speed, with a tailhook dragging. Jets later amplify the nightmare. Approach speeds climb to 130 to 150 knots. Heavier airframes demand stronger wires, taller barriers. Miss, and the kinetic energy is catastrophic. Post-war statistics paint the grim picture. In the early 1950s, as Sea Vampires and Sea Hawks enter service, Royal Navy landing accident rates soar. Barrier engagements and overruns account for the bulk, often 70 to 80% of major flight deck incidents. American carriers in Korea face the same plague. Essex-class straight decks lose aircraft weekly to the same unforgiving geometry. Pilots whisper about the Widowmaker deck. Morale dips. Squadrons bleed experienced men faster than replacements arrive. Campbell carries these ghosts into every meeting. He remembers friends lost, not to flak or fighters, but to steel and bad luck. In the painted trials on Triumph, every safe bolter feels like payback. A sea vampire misses the wire, pilot firewalls the throttle, the jet climbs away clean over the sea. No crash. No funeral. The deck crew exhales, waves the next bird in without skipping a beat. Simultaneous ops become routine. The carrier's pulse quickens. More sorties, fewer losses. The U.S. Navy, watching closely, moves faster. USS Antietam emerges from yard in December 1952 with a real-angled deck, 8 degrees, structural sponsons welded out to port. January 1953 trials off Virginia Capes. 1,000 plus landings. Results electrify observers. Bolter rates stay similar, but consequences vanish. No barriers needed routinely. Deck fires plummet. Accident investigators note immediate drops in Class A mishaps, those costing over $500,000 or a life. By 1955, the revolution spreads. HMS Ark Royal commissions with purpose-built angle, steam cats, and mirror landing system, another British innovation. U.S. carriers retrofit en masse. Midway, Essex classes get the upgrade. Korean War vets fly angled decks in later cruises and feel the difference. Confidence returns. A missed approach? Just go around. No hesitation. No terror. The payoff crystallizes in cold numbers. Pre-angle, barrier-related and overrun crashes dominate deck losses. Post-adoption, across Allied fleets, major flight deck accidents tied to landing errors fall sharply. Estimates from operational logs and safety reviews point to reductions approaching 80% in the most hazardous categories. Fewer planes destroyed. Fewer pilots killed or maimed. Squadrons maintain strength through prolonged ops. Carriers project power relentlessly, no longer bleeding from self-inflicted wounds. Campbell stands on Ark Royal's bridge during her 1955 workups, watching a Sea Hawk catch Wire 3, peel off safely on a bolter. He allows himself a small smile. The crazy line on paper has become steel reality. The ghost's quiet, at least for a while. But innovation never stops. What other dangers lurk in the jet age? And how does one man's idea ripple into the nuclear era? 1955 fades into 1956. The angled deck is no longer an experiment, it's doctrine. On the flight deck of the newly commissioned USS Forrestal, the world's first supercarrier, pilots of Attack Squadron 34 line up their FJ-3 Furus for qualification. The angle is pronounced, 9 degrees, a full structural sponson jutting out to port like a defiant wing. The mirror landing system, another British gift, a Euro-stabilized concave mirror projecting a glowing meatball glide path, glows steady against the island. No more batsmen waving paddles in blinding spray. The pilot keeps the ball centered between datum lights. Simple. Precise. Forgiving. A young ensign, fresh from advanced training at Pensacola, makes his first approach. Wind over deck 20 knots, deck pitching 5 degrees. He's high. The ball climbs. Instinct screams, go around, but old muscle memory hesitates. Then he remembers, this isn't the straight deck he trained on in simulators. Miss the wire, and there's no steel wall waiting. He adds power. The Fury surges, climbs clear over the port catwalk, banks into the pattern. Deck control never even pauses. Next aircraft is already rolling into position on the waist catapult. No crash siren. No scattered wreckage. Just the steady thump-thump of launches and recoveries continuing without interruption. The ensign circles, heart still racing, lines up again. This time the ball stays glued. Hook catches number 3 wire. Deceleration pins him to the seat. He taxis clear forward while another jet traps behind him. Continuous cyclic operations, something straight-deck skippers only dreamed of during the desperate days off Okinawa. In 1945, carriers paused launches entirely during recoveries, vulnerable for 20 agonizing minutes. Now, the tempo never breaks. Sorties flow like water. Across the Atlantic, the same transformation unfolds. HMS Eagle, freshly angled in 1955, works up in the Irish Sea. Sea venoms and scimitars scream down the offset path. Bolters, once heart-stopping events, become routine maneuvers. Squadron commanders report pilots flying with newfound aggression, pushing weather minima, pressing night ops, knowing a missed approach won't end in twisted metal and burning fuel. Attrition rates drop. In one 6-month Mediterranean deployment, Eagle's air group loses 0 aircraft to deck mishaps. Pre-angle averages hovered at 3 to 5 per cruise, often more. The numbers accumulate quietly in classified reports. Royal Navy safety reviews, U.S. Naval Aviation Safety Center analyses, joint exercises in the late 1950s, all converge on the same conclusion. Major flight deck accidents attributable to landing geometry, barrier strikes, deck overruns into parked aircraft, secondary fires, plunge by factors previously unseen. Conservative estimates place the reduction at 75 to 85% within the first decade of widespread adoption. In raw terms, hundreds of aircraft preserved, dozens of pilots and deck crew alive who otherwise would not have been. You can almost taste the relief on the deck plates. Yellow shirt directors move with confidence instead of dread. Crash crews stand down more often. The fire main system stays charged but rarely used for self-inflicted wounds. Carriers steam into harm's way. Suez Crisis, Lebanon 1958, Quemoy-Matsu Straits, with air groups intact, ready to launch strike after strike. Dennis Campbell watches from the periphery. Promoted, decorated, he commands carriers himself before stepping ashore. He rarely speaks publicly of the idea. Modesty runs deep in the man. But in private correspondence with Boddington and American counterparts, he admits the quiet pride, "We gave them a chance to survive their own mistakes." The angled deck becomes so fundamental that younger pilots never know the old terror. They train on simulators with angled visuals, learn mirror systems from day one. The straight deck slips into history books as a relic of propeller and early jet eras, dangerous, heroic, but ultimately obsolete. Yet every revolution carries its own shadows. The angled deck enables heavier, faster jets. Those jets demand more powerful catapults, longer decks, nuclear-age endurance. New risks emerge: steam catapult failures, high-speed aborts, deck-edge engine ingestions. Safety never stands still. Still, in the quiet hours before dawn launches, when the only sound is the hiss of jet intakes and the creak of arrestor engines resetting, the old hands remember. They remember the days when every trap felt like Russian roulette. They remember the man who drew a simple angled line on a notepad in a smoke-filled room and changed the geometry of survival. Campbell's crazy method wasn't about genius. It was about refusing to accept that pilots must die for the limitations of steel and wire. It was about giving them room to breathe, room to fly away, room to come back and try again. And in doing so, it rewrote the rules of carrier warfare for generations. Section 5. The Legacy in Steel and Sky. July 1969. Yankee Station, Gulf of Tonkin. Dawn bleeds orange across the horizon as USS Constellation, CV-64, turns into the wind at 28 knots. The angled deck, now a standard feature on every American supercarrier, gleams under floodlights. 9 degrees of offset steel, sponsons cantilevered far out over the sea, arrestor wires stretched taut like harp strings. Phantom twos and intruders wait in the pack, engines idling, while A-4 Skyhawks roll forward for catapult shots. The rhythm is relentless. Launch, recover, launch again. No pause. No vulnerability window. A Crusader pilot, Lieutenant J.G. Harlan Hawk Reynolds, traps after a night CAP over North Vietnam. Approach speed 145 knots. Hook down. Ball centered in the mirror. The deck heaves in a moderate swell. He's slightly low. Ball dips red. Old instincts from straight deck training scream, "Wave off." But he corrects, adds a touch of power, and the hook snags number 4 wire. Deceleration shoves him into the harness. He taxis clear to the forward deck park while the next Phantom is already in the groove, lights winking. No barrier crash. No deck foul. Just seamless flow. Reynolds shuts down, pops the canopy, and exhales. He's heard the stories from the old chiefs, the Korean War days when a missed wire meant fire, twisted metal, lost buddies. Now, a bolter is just another go-around. The LSO gives a thumbs up from the platform. Deck control never broke stride. In the 4 hours since flight ops began, Constellation has launched and recovered 60 sorties without a single mishap tied to landing geometry. In 1951, that would have been unthinkable. The angled deck's fingerprints are everywhere in the jet age. It enables the heavy hitters, F-4 Phantoms with their brutal approach speeds, A-6 intruders laden with ordnance, later the A-7 Corsair II and F-14 Tomcat. These beasts demand precise, high-energy traps, yet the offset path gives pilots an escape hatch. Miss 3 wires? Firewall it. The jet climbs away over empty sea instead of plowing into the island or igniting the deck park. The psychological shift is profound. Pilots push harder, fly in worse weather, press night recoveries with confidence. Attrition from deck accidents drops so low it becomes a footnote in readiness reports. By the mid-1970s, Safety data from the Naval Safety Center tells the quiet triumph. Compared to straight deck operations in the early jet era, 1948 to 1953, major Class A flight deck mishaps, those involving death, serious injury, or aircraft loss, plummet across the board. When isolating incidents directly attributable to landing path geometry, overruns, barrier engagements leading to secondary crashes, deck fires from fouled recoveries, the reduction consistently registers between 75% and 85% in fleet-wide analyses. Some internal studies, cross-referencing Royal Navy and U.S. data through joint exercises, edge toward the higher figure, an 80% cut in the deadliest category of carrier accidents. You can sense the change in the ready rooms. Pilots no longer swap grim barrier stories over coffee. Instead, they debrief mirror deviations, hook-skip tendencies, wind-over-deck effects. The conversation has shifted from survival to precision. Deck crews move with the calm of men who rarely face sudden infernos. Fire parties drill, but the real emergencies come from combat damage, not self-inflicted wounds. Campbell's idea, born in a Farnborough smoke haze, has become infrastructure. Every Nimitz-class carrier that follows inherits the angle as bedrock design. France's Charles de Gaulle, India's Vikrant, Britain's Queen Elizabeth, all carry the same offset lineage. Even China's Liaoning and Shandong, built on the bones of Soviet carriers, incorporate angled decks because the math is merciless. Straight decks bleed aircraft in high-tempo jet operations. In quiet retirement, Campbell, now Rear Admiral, retired, receives occasional letters from American skippers and test pilots. "Your crazy angle saved my squadron more times than I can count," one writes after a 1972 Westpac cruise. He keeps the notes in a drawer, rarely mentions them. The CB, the Legion of Merit, the quiet thanks from across the sea, they are enough. The true measure isn't in medals or statistics. It's in the empty chairs that never had to be filled. The pilots who grew old, raised families, flew one more tour because a 10-degree shift gave them room to breathe. The deck fires that never started. The carriers that stayed on station instead of limping home gutted by their own mistakes. Today, when a Super Hornet traps on a moonless night, hook slamming wire, pilot walking the wing to the island with the casual stride of routine, the ghost of that 1951 notepad sketch lingers in every controlled roar. One man saw the fatal geometry and dared to change it. Not with exotic alloys or radical engines, just an angle. A line drawn differently.